It's a first in American history. The Vice President breaks a tie in the Senate to confirm a cabinet pick. Plus, VALPO's thoughts on the immigration ban. Where does it stand now? It's all ahead on this episode of VALPO Townhall. Hello and thank you for joining us on VALPO Townhall here on VUTV. I'm Micah Topel alongside Carlos Cabaya as our Republican representative and Eric Smith as our Democratic representative. Guys, thank you for being here tonight.
Happy to be back.
Thank you.
So, Betsy DeVos, a Michigan Republican, was confirmed yesterday as the new Secretary of Education. To catch you up, Scott McLean has a look at yesterday's confirmation.
The yeas are 50, the nays are 50.
The Senate voted to confirm Betsy DeVos as Education Secretary today, but just barely. VP Mike Pence, the Senate president, was forced to cast the deciding vote in favor of Trump's controversial nominee, a first in Senate history.
The Senate being equally divided, the Vice President votes in the affirmative and the nomination is confirmed.
DeVos's confirmation comes after a well-coordinated Democratic effort to block her. After two Republican senators, Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, broke to vote against DeVos, Democrats would have needed just one more vote. One more vote! One more vote! But they ultimately failed to turn an extra Republican, despite a marathon overnight session taking shifts speaking against the charter school advocate.
The nominee for Secretary of Education doesn't know some of the most basic facts about education policy.
Democrats are critical of DeVos's lack of experience with public schools, donations to Republicans, and support for school vouchers. But she never lost the support of the White House, which tweeted, "Betsy DeVos is a reformer, and she's going to be a great education secretary for our kids." After the vote, DeVos herself tweeted in part, "I appreciate the Senate's diligence and am honored to serve." A small victory for Republicans who will still need to battle Democratic stall tactics to get the rest of the cabinet confirmed. In Washington, I'm Scott McLean.
I first want to get your thoughts on this contentious confirmation. Eric, how do you think this happened?
You have contentious confirmations like this when you pick people who are so far outside of a reasonable political choice. Betsy DeVos has no experience in education. She's never been an educator. She's never run a public school district. The only reason she got this confirmation is because she's a major Republican donor. That's why there's so much opposition to her and why the Senate phone lines were jammed at a rate never before seen, because she's just outside the normal realm. She's not qualified. She's only there because she has a ton of money.
Carlos, do you have anything to?
While I agree with Eric that Betsy DeVos has no experience within the education field, she's never been a teacher, she's never really served on any political field. I would say, though, that she has chaired the Republican Party of Michigan before and that she has experience running a department, and I think she would be a great choice in running the Department of Education, and would, to the best of her ability, run the education department.
I think that's a ridiculous assertion that running the Michigan Republican Party somehow equates to being able to run the Department of Education, which requires a great deal of knowledge about federal loans, which she admitted under Senate testimony she has no experience with. Her kids have never had to take out a loan. She herself has never been involved in that process. She admitted under questioning from Elizabeth Warren that she has no experience running a bank. So yes, she ran a department. She ran the Michigan Republican Party, but I don't know how that equates to an experience in education. She was an education lobbyist, created a bunch of charter schools in Michigan that perform worse than their public school counterparts, and have divested money from public education. She's there because of money and lobbying, not because of any actual experience or because she's going to actually do anything positive for the Department of Education or students.
Well, she might not have experience in those fields, but she does have experience running a company or running departments and being the chair of the Republican Party and being a CEO.
I just don't see how that equates to positivity for students, for teachers, if you have no experience working with any sorts of those people, and I think it's going to be a disaster.
She's an advocate for school choice.
Which has not worked in Michigan and won't work at the national level.
I think I disagree with that a lot.
Do you have any reasoning? What are your reasons for that?
Well, you see American politicians, both Republican and Democrats, created this education system that's funded by local property taxes, and when you are poor and you live in a poor neighborhood, you go to a poor school, and I think that the ability to choose schools and be able to be granted money to attend private schools gives you the ability to attend better schools.
So further divest money from poor school districts by putting them into charter schools and private schools, which will only
Not
exacerbate the
necessarily.
problem for people who are born into a certain income and certain zip code will have a terrible school experience. So let's just divert the money further, is the Republican and Betsy DeVos's suggestion.
Not necessarily. You see, public schools are funded by local property taxes, and I say that voucher schools should be funded by federal government.
I still think you're just divesting money because we need to invest in our public education, which you refuse to say should support. How can you not support public education? It's a keystone of the American way. Like, how are these students going to succeed if they have someone at the very top who doesn't even believe in the public education system?
Eric, is there anything, you recently accepted a position with Teach for America, is there anything that you think would directly affect your position going forward with Betsy DeVos being Secretary of
Yes,
Education?
as someone who's about to become an educator, I think it's extremely disturbing that she has such little support from teachers. And as the commentaries went out there, what has she had to do to become education secretary? Absolutely nothing. She's just wealthy and she lobbied for education reform, whereas teachers have to go through rigorous certifications and recertifications, have master's degree, pay tens of thousands of dollars to continue to remain being teachers. And Betsy DeVos has never had to do any of that. She was born into money, she used it to lobby, and now she gets to be head of the Department of Education, not really draining the swamp, just stacking it with more people who have money and got Trump to where he is today.
How many Secretary of Educations have we had in the United States history that were actually teachers or educators?
Certainly there have been ones that are educators that have run school districts, because on the short list you have people like Michelle Rhee who ran Washington, D.C. schools. You have people who ran school districts. Betsy DeVos has never run anything closely related to education. She just lobbied Michigan.
She knows how to manage and she knows how to be a CEO.
No, she knows how to get her way through money and to stack the odds in her favor. That's what the DeVosses are. That's what they were in Michigan. That's all they were. They had money, and if you weren't on their side in the Republican Party, you got pushed out. And they lobbied very successfully for charter schools, which if you look at the state of Michigan, are not working. They do not perform better than their public school counterparts, and it's just been a complete disaster for the state. And it's just going to be replicated at the national level, which is extremely disturbing.
Okay. So is there anything, I guess, you could narrow it down to a couple different specific points. Carlos, you seem to be arguing for her positively in her position, Eric against. Is there anything any specific points you could nail it down to why or why not you think she's qualified?
I like the school voucher choice, and I like the fact that she can run an organization, she can run a department, but I wouldn't necessarily pick her as my top choice for Secretary of Education.
I'll keep it simple. Inexperience, lack of knowledge, money got her to where she was. There's no other reason. It's very simple. She's not qualified. She just got there because she has lots of money, which should disturb everybody at the deepest level because we as Americans value working hard to where we get there, and meritocracy, and Betsy DeVos just used her money to steamroll her way through the United States Senate.
Mm-hmm. So now this is a very historic tiebreaker with Vice President Mike Pence having to be the one that cast his vote that allowed the confirmation to occur. What do you think this is saying about senators' opinions of her? And specifically, what about the two Republicans who voted against her? That's something that probably has not occurred very often in history.
Well, the Democrats really lobbied hard within those two Republican senators that voted against DeVos. And I believe that politicians vote in favor of their party lines, and that's something I disagree with a lot. But it is how it is. That's the American political system.
I don't think that it is how it has to be, though. I think he has nominated people who are so far outside of the mainstream that's why you had Republicans defecting. There's reports that the Senate phone lines were jammed 4, 5, 6 times their normal level during the height of opposition. For the Department of Education, which usually is not a contentious posting within the American government, just shows you how far out of touch Trump is with who should be running the government. And he ran on this whole thing of draining the swamp. So yes, he's bringing in outsiders, but outsiders who are still part of the swamp because they have a ton of money. They're not outsiders because they have new innovative ideas. They're simply outsiders because they haven't run departments before. So we're just bringing inexperienced, out of touch, wealthy individuals.
Just
to
because
run
they're
these
wealthy
departments.
doesn't mean they don't know what they're talking about.
I don't concede that. So if someone who became wealthy and was appointed to small business secretary, that makes sense. He's successful. He should be that. But education is not about profits. Education should not be about corporatism, which is all Betsy DeVos stands for.
I don't think she stands for only corporatism. I think she's passionate about being part of the government and about school choice and voucher
No,
systems.
she's passionate about being able to return education to charter schools, which have corporate backing. She's passionate about putting charter schools, which have religious backings, at the center of the neighborhood because she's extremely religious. She's going to bring all of her opinions into the Department of Education and not be looking out for public education, which she's tasked with looking over. She's someone who cares about charter schools and private schools, but could not commit to protecting public education under testimony, which is just ridiculous. That should be disqualifying. Public education is what lifts people out and moves people up into another economic status because they have a great education, and she will not invest in that because she's so driven by this ideology of corporate and religious institutions as opposed to a strong public education in the United States.
Well, you see, every American president went to private school, not public school, and I think that she notices that, and I think that it's a good idea to put more kids into private schools.
And then continue to hurt those who are stuck in public education. So let's elevate a few and leave the rest of them behind. That's not an
Not
education
necessarily
policy.
with the
That's-
voucher
that's
system,
separating
you're
the wealthy
allowed
and the poor
to-
even further.
With the school voucher system, you're allowed to go to private school. You have that choice. It's giving every American student the choice to go to whatever school they wish to
While
go
harming most of those who are stuck in public education.
Yes, it's definitely a very contentious debate that has been going on, as of more recently, over the last couple of years. When we come back, though, we have the latest national and local reaction on the immigration ban. Plus, we get our panelists' thoughts on Trump's other cabinet picks, including the Supreme Court justice in the highest agencies. We'll be right back.
Well, I think that's all we need. Thank you so much for coming in. We'll be in touch.
Okay, this is it. Just shake his hand and walk out with your head held high. Don't mess this up. Thank you. Nailed it. Don't let a bad handshake get in the way of getting the job you want. Find out more at the Career Center.
The recent immigration ban has drawn harsh criticism against the Trump administration. Meanwhile, several Trump supporters are saying it ties in with his campaign promises. Here's Sean Spicer elaborating on Trump's decision.
He's doing everything he can, and he walks into office. There are 7 countries that the Obama administration has already identified as not having the proper systems in place to guarantee our safety. And I think his immediate reaction is to do what he has to do to make sure that we're not looking back and saying, you know what we should have done? We should have made sure that we had stricter vetting in place for those 7 countries. So he took immediate and decisive action to make sure that this country and our people were protected. That's what he's talking about, is making sure that we don't have a regret that a month from now, 2 months from now, or a year from now, we hadn't done something to protect people.
I want to start with you, Carlos. Do you think his justifications are correct?
Well, during the Trump campaign, Trump did promise that he would want to screen immigration and refugees coming from those countries those 7 countries that he banned. I think that he went a little too far because now he just banned the whole immigration system for those 7 countries. And I wouldn't say that his justifications are wholly correct, but I do somewhat, in a way, support it, but not to the extent that Trump did go with the immigration ban.
It's just ridiculous. It lays outside of all American values. And if you watched the government lawyers try to defend the ban yesterday in front of the Ninth Circuit, it was laughable. They cannot cite where the information is coming from that these people pose some sort of security threat. There's a study done that we're more likely to die from lawnmowers than we are from a refugee-driven terrorist attack. So should we be banning lawnmowers next to the United States? This is what happens when you elect someone who lives only on rhetoric and not fact, and real fact, not the alternative ones. It is ridiculous. It is against our values. I genuinely hope the courts strike this down. There's no way that you can agree with this and support being American. I understand security. I understand security concerns, but blocking refugees is not going to make us safer. It is just going to make our relations with other countries worse, lead to better recruitment of extremists around the world as we lock more people out. And if Trump was really serious about our security, I'm fascinated why Saudi Arabia wasn't put on the ban when they're the ones who financed the 9/11 attack.
I just wanted to make a correction. It's not just refugees who ban all nationals from those countries.
Right, and in some cases legitimate green card holders and people with legitimate visas, because as is Trump's style, he signs things and thinks about the consequences later after there's a bunch of protests and nobody knows what's going on. So typical Trump administration, oh, I can run things well because I run my business well, but in fact, he's just been a disaster at every point of these executive orders, and this one just takes the cake in terms of being rolled out in the most disorganized, unthoughtful manner ever.
Do you guys think that I know there was a judge in Washington that had knocked the law down and Trump went off on a Twitter storm about that. Do you think that the judge made that decision purely based on partisan politics, or do you think that he was making that decision based off of legitimately not believing that it was constitutional?
I think the important thing to parse out here is that what has happened is there's not been a ruling on the merits of the immigration ban. Simply, there's been stays issued where the judges have found there'd be more harm against immigrants or the refugees who are stuck in airports, so they've stayed the executive order. So I don't think it's partisanship. These rulings are quite common. What concerns me, though, is how much purview is the judiciary going to give these executive orders, because there's sort of a deference to executive orders as of late. So I'm curious to see what happens when there's a ruling on the merits. But I don't think these stays are partisan. I think they're just part of the normal judiciary process of the United States.
I agree with him on that. I think it's nonpartisan. I think the judge was just doing his job, and that Trump did go a little too far with this immigration ban.
I do think this presents something extremely disturbing, though, if we have these continued assaults on the judiciary by Donald Trump, because it is a third and equal part of our United States government, and just every time they rule against him going on a Twitter storm is neither presidential or healthy for democracy that values checks and balances. I think it sets an extremely dangerous precedent moving forward.
Okay. So the immigration ban even drew a reaction from VALPO's administration, actually. President Heckler, I'm sure you both received the email, many students did, or all students did as well. Do you think that it was right of him to take a stance on this issue? I guess we can start with whoever wants to. Carlos?
I think that it was appropriate for President Heckler to reassure to students on campus that they are safe on campus. However, I do believe that the president of the university should not be taking political stances. And he didn't clearly say that, but it does seem like he did take a political stance.
I hear where you're coming from, where I think it's important that universities don't become overtly political, but I think we have to recognize this community, the community we have here and the community many colleges have and universities have, which is foreigners, students from different countries, and I think he had to reassure them that we are still going to protect them. So I think it almost moved from the political to reassuring that we at VALPO are committed to truth, and we believe people from different backgrounds and walks of life are valuable here at this institution, which I don't think is the message that is coming out from the White House right now. So I agree, overtly political from a university, not a great thing, but I think he had to reassure the students that are not just white, that they have a place here and that they are safe here and that they are a valued part of this community.
Mm-hmm. So while there was a great debate over his pick for the education secretary, there are still several cabinet appointments waiting for confirmation from Trump's administration. On our way back, coming back from the break, we will talk with our panelists about those.
Good morning, Valparaiso University. What's a better way to start your day than with a new jam? And WVUR has just what you need.
But if you close your eyes, does it almost feel like nothing changed at all? And if you close your eyes, does it... If Daniel won't change your mind, baby,
Broadcasting sports, news, weather, and music, on air, online, and on campus. WVUR is my jam.
For the Departments of Justice, Health and Human Services, Labor, and Treasury all have yet to be confirmed. Here's Senator Mitch McConnell on the Senate floor talking about this issue.
We're no longer in the midst of a contentious presidential election. We have a new president, and that president has now put forth an exceptional Supreme Court nominee and a number of well-qualified cabinet nominees. And yet, more than 2 weeks into his term, President Trump has the fewest cabinet secretaries confirmed at this point than any other president since George Washington. The president deserves to have his cabinet in place. The American people deserve that as well.
Any thoughts on any of these candidates or those who have already been confirmed?
Well, I think it's one that we need to bring up as Attorney General is Jeff Sessions, who I think presents the most disturbing of President Trump's choices. You know, Coretta Scott King wrote a letter opposing his federal judgeship. He has made comments that are extremely derogatory towards especially black people, and it's so rare to have someone denied for a federal judgeship, and then to have that same person being considered for the Attorney General, I think presents one of the most far out there picks of Donald Trump. And Mitch McConnell has a point that there's been less people approved than at this point in Barack Obama's presidency, but he didn't pick people that were so far out that they caused this sort of public outcry. Yes, we should have right people in the right institutions, but they should be thoroughly vetted, and Trump's team did not vet these people. There's been scandal after scandal from his nominees, and I think the reason that we're having such a slowdown is because they're so far out of the normal picks to lead agencies. So it's not slow because Democrats are being obstructionists, it's slow because he's picked just atrocious people for some of these positions.
Trump's cabinet picks are definitely outrageous, and sometimes it just doesn't make sense. But you see, when Washington has been full of corruption and full of people who are just evil, plain out evil, this is what we get. We get a President Trump, we get a rise of populism, and we get all these cabinet picks that does not make sense. And the reason for that is all the previous presidents, all the previous politicians.
I'd like to push back on that. We have a minority president who lost by more than 3 million votes at the popular level. He won the Electoral College, so yes, he's our president. He is my president, as much as I disagree with him. But we have Republicans who are winning structurally and then saying, oh, we're the party of populism. No, they're the party that has gerrymandered congressional districts, the party that wins the Electoral College but hasn't won the popular vote in forever, I think since 2004. And then saying, oh, we're the voice of populism, we're the anti-Washington voice. But no, you just have won structurally. You actually haven't won popular sentiment. You just have portrayed this message that you've won populism.
Okay. You guys kind of touched on this a little bit already, but do you think that Trump is leaning toward people who are just way too far out of this political swamp that he had been talking about? Or do you think that, or what are your reasonings for believing that Democrats have been opposing all of his cabinet picks so much?
So I have to continue to reiterate my point. He said he wanted to drain the swamp, so in that sense I'm not surprised he's picked people outside of this political spectrum, but to steal a phrase from another commentator, he's draining the swamp and replacing it with snakes. People who are very wealthy, people who are very invested in Wall Street, very invested in all these things that aren't for the American people. Wall Street's not for the American people, and he said he was. Betsy DeVos, this millionaire, billionaire lobbyist, is not part of the American people. If he had picked common people, people who didn't have politics but who had experience in their fields, that makes sense. But he's just picking people who are in bed with special interests, and it's just perpetuating all these things he complained about during the campaign. So he's nobody to blame but himself. He's just breaking his most basic campaign promise of draining the swamp, because these people are outsiders in the sense that they don't have experience, but still insiders with their money and their connection to special interests.
But wouldn't you just say the same with the Hillary administration? She was funded by Wall Street. She had the biggest campaign fund in the history of American politics and history of presidential campaigns, $1.1 billion losing campaign.
So I think you have a point in that Secretary of State Clinton was supported by big money as well. I'm going to give you that point, but at the same time, I don't think she's planning on appointing Wall Street insiders to these major posts. I think if you look at her listings for these major cabinets, there's a good mix of civil servants, people who had been in there before, and not just people who had a bunch of money. Because if you take any combination of some of his picks, they represent more wealth than most of the American population. I think that's still, people want to be represented by people who are like them, and I think Democrats are guilty of appointing people who have been represented, but I think Trump is just as guilty and said he's going to come in and shake things up, but it's just shaking things up with money outsiders and not shaking things up with people who actually are going to represent the common American people.
Well, I agree with you that Hillary Clinton would have appointed intelligent scholars into her cabinet. I'd rather have a weak, stupid presidential cabinet than smart ones who will manipulate and corrupt the whole American political system.
Before not to cut you off, Eric, but we do want a quick touch on the last point here. Just to wrap up, what do you guys think about Trump's pick for the Supreme Court, Neil Gorsuch? Any thoughts on his? Is he right to sit on the bench?
I think he is a good choice for the bench, as he would be the great replacement for Antonin Scalia.
Well, if you're looking forward to another pro-life, extremely conservative judge, you have your great choice. I will give Mr. Trump respect that he has picked someone who I think falls more in the mainstream, but this is not an interesting pick. This is just another very conservative justice who continue to promote things that I think fall outside the mainstream of many Americans' beliefs, and particularly women's belief. I think will only further galvanize opposition to Donald Trump and his anti-women policies.
All right. Well, that about does it for us here at VALPO Townhall. For Carlos Cabaya, Eric Smith, and all of us here at VUTV, have a great night, VALPO.